Picture this. You are scrolling through your phone on a Tuesday night, and you come across someone's name in your contacts. Someone you used to know. Maybe it was a college roommate who could dismantle any argument in under 30 seconds. Maybe a co-worker who always saw where a project was going to fall apart 2 months before anyone else even suspected a problem. Maybe just someone from your hometown who always seemed different, tuned into a frequency no one else could hear. You haven't talked to them in years. You Google their name and find nothing recent. There are no LinkedIn updates, no Instagram posts, no hot takes anywhere. They have just gone quiet. And here's the thing. They didn't fail. They didn't burn out in the obvious way. Nobody is telling a cautionary tale about them at dinner parties. They just receded like a tide going out. Where did they go? Today, I want to give you an answer to that question, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you are either going to understand someone in your life a whole lot better, or you are going to understand yourself. Let's start with the pattern, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Think about the trajectory of someone genuinely unusually intelligent. Not just book smart. We're talking about people who think in systems, who see connections most people miss, who ask the kind of questions that make a room go uncomfortable. In school, maybe they were ahead. In their 20s, maybe they were driven. And then somewhere in their 30s or 40s, something shifts. The ambition doesn't disappear, it turns inward. The energy that used to go into climbing the ladder, building the network and staying visible, goes somewhere else entirely. It goes into a book, into a garden, or into a project nobody else understands yet. This isn't a new phenomenon. It is, in fact, one of the most consistent patterns in the history of human achievement. Isaac Newton did the work that became his theory of gravitation, not inside a prestigious institution, not surrounded by colleagues and collaborators, but during the Great Plague of London in the 1660s, alone at his family farm in Lincolnshire. 2 years of isolation. 2 years of thinking without interruption. He later called it his miraculous year. The world got calculus out of that solitude. Henry David Thoreau walked away from Concord Society in 1845 and spent 2 years at Walden Pond. People thought he had lost his mind. He was 27 years old. What he produced there shaped American philosophy for the next 2 centuries. In the 20th century, the reclusive writer Thomas Pynchon published some of the most celebrated novels in American literature, while almost completely avoiding public life. No interviews, no appearances, just the work. J.D. Salinger wrote The Catcher in the Rye, one of the best-selling novels in American history, then moved to rural New Hampshire and refused to publish another word for decades. He kept writing, he just stopped performing. The pattern is everywhere, and it begs the question, is this a symptom of something going wrong? Or is it something going profoundly, quietly, right? The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung had an answer, and it's one of the most underrated ideas in all of 20th century psychology. Jung spent decades studying the human mind, not just the individual mind, but the shared mental architecture that all of us inherit. He called it the collective unconscious. Here's how to think about it. Imagine the human brain comes preloaded with software, instincts, inherited patterns of thinking and feeling, frameworks that have been baked in over thousands of years of evolution and culture. Before you ever consciously chose to believe anything, a massive amount of your worldview was already installed. Jung's observation, and this is the part that gets uncomfortable, was that most people spend their entire lives running that pre-installed software. They want what they are told to want. They fear what they are told to fear. They measure their success by metrics handed to them by their parents, their culture, their employer, or their social media feed. And they do all of this while genuinely believing they are making independent choices. Jung called this state identification with the collective. You are so merged with the shared script that you mistake it for your own voice. Now here's where it gets interesting. Highly intelligent people, and I want to be precise here, I don't just mean a high IQ, I mean people with strong internal awareness and deep curiosity. These people tend at some point to notice the script. They start seeing the machinery behind the curtain. They realize that a lot of what passes for opinion is just recycled assumption. A lot of what passes for ambition is just programmed anxiety. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Jung called the process of stepping out of this collective programming individuation. The gradual, sometimes painful work of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you were designed to be. But here's the catch, and this is the part Jung was unusually honest about. Society doesn't like individuation. Society needs predictability. It needs people to follow the script. And when someone starts to deviate from it, starts asking questions that don't have approved answers, or starts living in ways that don't conform to the expected timeline, the collective pushes back. Not always overtly. Often it is subtle. You are told you are too much, you are overthinking, you are not being realistic, you are difficult to work with. You get passed over for promotions that go to people who are more comfortable, more agreeable, and more legible to the people in charge. And at some point, many genuinely intelligent people make a simple calculation. The cost of participation is higher than the reward. So they start to exit. I want to talk about something that rarely gets named directly, but I think is one of the central, hidden burdens of being highly intelligent in mainstream American society. I am going to call it translation exhaustion. Here's what I mean. When you think in systems, when your mind naturally builds models and sees second and third order consequences, when you are accustomed to holding complexity without needing to resolve it prematurely, you think at a level that most conversations simply don't operate at. So, every single interaction requires translation. You compress your multi-layered thought into a digestible soundbite. You strip away the qualifications because people find them tedious. You lose the nuance because nuance reads as evasiveness. You say it's complicated and watch people's eyes glaze over. You say something simple and feel a small internal betrayal. And you do this dozens of times a day. Every meeting, every dinner, every casual conversation. What people don't realize is that this translation work isn't just socially exhausting, it's cognitively damaging. Your mind is like a muscle. Use it below its capacity long enough and it doesn't stay sharp. It drifts. The habit of simplifying starts to bleed into your private thinking. The constant performance of being easier than you are starts to hollow you out. Jung wrote extensively about the persona, the mask we wear for society. For most people, the gap between the mask and the true self is manageable. The mask fits reasonably well, but for someone whose natural way of engaging with the world is deeply out of step with what most social environments reward, the mask becomes suffocating. Think about what that looks like in a real American workplace. You are in a meeting. Someone presents a strategy with 3 obvious fatal flaws. You see them immediately, not because you are arrogant, but because that's just how your mind works. But the last time you raised concerns this early, you were quietly labeled negative. Not a team player, someone who complicates things. So you stay quiet. You watch the plan get approved. You watch it fail 6 months later, exactly the way you predicted. And a small part of you dies. This happens again and again. And each time, the gap between who you actually are and who you're allowed to be in that room grows wider. Eventually, the performance becomes untenable. A 2021 Stanford study found that people with significantly above-average intelligence spend an estimated 6 to 8 hours a day performing normalcy, calibrating their expression, moderating their language, and managing how they come across. That's almost a full extra shift, and they don't get paid for it. They get exhausted by it, so they stop. They trade the external performance for something internal. They get quieter. They get harder to reach. They are still very much alive, but they are investing that energy somewhere else, into something real, into something that asks something of them, instead of asking them to be less. There's another reason intelligent people disappear, and it's one that almost nobody talks about directly, because it's a little uncomfortable. Highly intelligent people make others feel exposed, not deliberately, not cruelly, just by existing at their natural level. Here's the psychology. When you encounter someone who is physically stronger than you, most people feel admiration, or perhaps a little motivation. When you meet someone wealthier, maybe it brings envy, or maybe aspiration. But when you meet someone who thinks more clearly than you do, who asks questions you hadn't thought to ask, and who sees implications you missed, something entirely different happens in the brain. Researchers studying social cognition have found that intellectual comparison activates threat responses in a way that physical or financial comparison often doesn't. Your thinking is deeply tied to your sense of self. If someone challenges the quality of your thinking, even implicitly, even without a word, they are touching something close to your identity. So people defend against it. And the defense rarely looks like defense. It looks like dismissal. They are too theoretical. They are not practical. They have no emotional intelligence. Sure, they're smart, but Jung called this shadow projection. When someone's presence highlights your own limitations, your lazy assumptions, or your unexamined beliefs, the mind doesn't always say, "I should think harder." Sometimes it says there is something wrong with them. The person being projected onto hasn't done anything. They haven't claimed superiority. They have just shown up at their natural level, and by doing so, created an uncomfortable mirror. This is why Socrates was executed. Not because his ideas were dangerous in the way a weapon is dangerous, but because his questions made people feel stupid, and that was intolerable. This is why Alan Turing, who arguably shortened World War II by years, was persecuted by the same government he had saved. Brilliance, when it can no longer be utilized, becomes a threat. In everyday American life, the persecution is more mundane but no less real. You get talked over in meetings. Your ideas get credited to someone with a better personality. You are told you need to work on your communication style, which often means stop making us feel like we are not following along. You get passed over for leadership roles that go to people who are better at performing confidence than at actually having it. And the intelligent person looks around and makes a quiet assessment. The game is not designed for me to win it honestly. And rather than compromise, they stop playing. Here is a hard truth about American culture specifically. We say we value intelligence. We celebrate genius in retrospect, on postage stamps, in biopics, and in the mythology of the lone inventor. But in the actual lived, daily experience of institutions, schools, corporations, media, and politics, what gets rewarded is not depth. It is legibility. It is risk relatability. It is the ability to make complex things seem simple, which is a very different skill from actually understanding complex things. Think about what goes viral online. Short, punchy, emotionally direct, absolute statements. Nuance doesn't trend. Caveats don't get shared. The moment you say, "Well, it depends," you have already lost the algorithm. Researchers at MIT tracked how information spreads across social networks and found that oversimplified, emotionally charged content spreads dramatically faster than accurate, nuanced information. The platforms are not neutral. They are actively selecting for a kind of thinking that is the opposite of careful. The modern workplace has the exact same problem. Companies put innovation on their walls. They hire consultants to run design thinking workshops. But what they actually promote is competence within the existing framework. The person who questions the framework, who says, "I think we are solving the wrong problem entirely," is a threat to stability, to hierarchy, and to the comfortable sense that the people in charge know what they are doing. So, What happens to those people? They leave, or they are pushed out. And then 5 years later, the company spends a fortune trying to recreate the thing that person was doing naturally. The mathematician Grigory Perelman solved one of the most notoriously difficult problems in mathematics, the Poincaré conjecture, which had stumped the world's best minds for nearly a century. He was offered the Fields Medal, the highest honor in mathematics, and a $1 million prize. He declined both. He walked away from academia entirely. People said he had cracked. People said he was mentally unstable. But here is another reading. Maybe he understood exactly what accepting those prizes would mean. He understood that he would become a performer, that his identity would be handed back to him as a product, and that the system, which had ignored him for years, would now want to claim him as proof of its own legitimacy. He chose to remain himself at significant personal cost. And that is not madness. That is a coherent set of values. Carl Jung built a tower, not metaphorically, but literally, in the Swiss village of Bollingen. Starting in 1923, he built a stone tower with his own hands. He designed it himself, laid the stones himself, and expanded it over the years. He spent long periods there with no telephone, no electricity, writing by candlelight, and cooking over an open fire. His colleagues thought he was having a nervous breakdown. His biographers have spent decades debating what it meant. But Jung described it simply. Bollingen was the only place where he could hear himself think, where no one needed him to be simpler, more accessible, or more collegial, where the work could be what the work needed to be without negotiation. And the work he did in that solitude, the concepts of individuation, the shadow, and the archetype, those ideas are now fundamental to modern psychology, to literature, to therapy, and to how we understand human development. It happened not despite the withdrawal, but because of it. This is the central paradox at the heart of everything I am telling you today. The withdrawal that looks like failure from the outside is often, from the inside, the beginning of the most important work a person will ever do. Think about the people we now celebrate without reservation. Emily Dickinson wrote nearly 1,800 poems in her bedroom in Amherst, Massachusetts. She barely left her house and published almost nothing in her lifetime. The neighbors thought she was odd. Today, she is considered one of the greatest poets in the English language. Harper Lee wrote To Kill a Mockingbird and then spent the rest of her long life in Monroeville, Alabama, deflecting interview requests and living quietly. One book, immortal. Stanley Kubrick made some of the most influential films in cinema history, while living like a recluse outside London, refusing to fly, avoiding crowds, and working at his own pace with obsessive attention to detail. He was widely regarded as difficult, eccentric, and impossible. He was also incomparable. These people didn't disappear because they failed to engage. They disengaged precisely so they could do the work that engagement was preventing. So, you are watching a 25-minute video about intelligent people withdrawing from society. Let me ask you something. Are you feeling any recognition right now? Not of someone else, but of yourself. Maybe you have been feeling a pull lately. A slow withdrawal from conversations that used to matter. A growing preference for your own company, not out of depression, but out of something that honestly feels more like relief. You have started declining invitations without guilt. You have gotten quieter at work, not because you have nothing to say, but because explaining feels like more effort than it's worth. You feel most alive when you are deep in a project, a book, a problem, or a piece of music, and least alive in rooms full of small talk. If any of that resonates, I am not here to diagnose you, but I am here to say that Jung's framework suggests this might not be pathology. It might be direction. The pull towards solitude, when it comes from a place of intellectual vitality and not despair, is often the psyche's way of saying, you need more room. You are operating at a fraction of your actual depth, and your inner life is demanding more. That doesn't mean cutting everyone off. It doesn't mean burning down your life. Jung didn't advocate for permanent isolation. He had a family, a clinical practice, and a community. What he advocated for was conscious withdrawal, intentional space, and the deliberate protection of inner life from the constant noise of collective demand. The question isn't whether to withdraw. The question is whether you are doing it on purpose or just drifting. Whether you are building something in the quiet or just hiding from the loud. Here is the final thing I want to leave you with. In every era, the people whose ideas end up shaping the world are almost never the people who were most visible during their lifetimes. They are the people who were willing to be invisible long enough to do the real work. Newton at that farm in Lincolnshire, Thoreau at Walden Pond, Jung at his stone tower in Bollingen. The world didn't lose them when they went quiet. In a very real sense, the world found them years, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries later, when the work they did in solitude finally reached people who were ready to receive it. So, if you feel the pull toward a quieter life, a deeper life, a life with more room in it, I want to offer you a reframe. You are not disappearing. You are just finally starting to show up for the work that actually matters, on the timeline that work requires, and in the space that kind of depth genuinely needs. Build the tower. Do the work. The world has a way of catching up.